sound of water against. The dock was the only thing breaking the silence that morning. David Harris, a tall black man in his late 30s, stood at the window of his small but beautiful lake cabin. He had worked hard for years to buy this place. It wasn't just a cabin to him, it was peace, privacy, and freedom from the noise of the city. He poured himself a cup of coffee, leaned against the wooden frame, and watched the ripples move across the lake. The early sun painted the water gold. For once he felt calm. But calm never lasts long when people can't mind their own business. Behind him, the living room looked warm and rustic. Books, framed pictures, and a fire waiting to be lit gave the cabin a sense of home. Sitting on the couch was a man in his 50s wearing a dark suit. His presence in the room felt heavy, important. This was no ordinary guest. This was Robert Mitchell, the state attorney general. "David," Mitchell said, adjusting his tie, "are you ready for today?" David nodded slowly. "As ready as I'll ever be. But I'm telling you, people around here are already watching me. They don't like that I bought this place." The attorney general leaned forward, his voice steady. "Let them watch. We're here for a bigger reason. Today, we finalize the case. And when we do, the truth about that HOA will finally come out." David set his coffee down, the weight of the conversation sitting heavy in his chest. "I just didn't think they'd push this far." As if the universe had heard his words, a loud banging rattled the cabin door. 3 sharp knocks, heavy and aggressive. David froze. Mitchell looked up from his papers. Another set of knocks followed, louder this time. "Open up!" a voice shouted from outside. David walked to the door, his jaw tightening. Through the small glass window, he saw them. 3 people from the local HOA, 2 men and a woman. The woman, dressed in a cream-colored suit, stood in front like she owned the place. Her finger pointed sharply at the door as she barked orders at the others. Behind them, David noticed something else, a police car parked on the gravel road. 2 uniformed officers stood beside it, watching. "Shwa," David muttered under his breath. "Of course." Mitchell rose from the couch, calm but alert. "Remember, don't lose your cool. They're looking for a reason." David pulled open the door. The woman's eyes narrowed as she looked him up and down. "Mr. Harris," she said, her voice sharp and commanding, "this property is in violation of HOA codes. We need to come inside immediately." David frowned. "Violation? This is my home. You don't just barge into people's houses." One of the men behind her, tall and broad-shouldered, stepped forward. "We've had multiple complaints. You're not following the community guidelines. Either let us in or we'll escalate this." David crossed his arms. "You're already escalating it. And last time I checked, you don't have the right to just walk in here." The woman's face turned red. She pointed a finger right at him. "Don't get smart with me. We know what you're hiding in there." David blinked. "What I'm hiding?" "Lady, the only thing I'm hiding is a coffee mug in the sink." The HOA members shifted, their frustration clear. The officers at the road began walking closer, their hands near their belts. Mitchell finally stepped forward. His presence filled the doorway like a storm, calm but impossible to ignore. "Is there a problem here?" the attorney general asked. His voice carried the kind of authority that made people pause. The HOA woman blinked, caught off guard. She clearly hadn't expected another man inside, especially one in a suit, with the air of someone who wasn't easily pushed around. "And you are?" she asked, her tone suddenly less sharp. Mitchell reached into his jacket and slowly pulled out his badge. He held it up for everyone to see. "Robert Mitchell, State Attorney General." The silence that followed was heavy. The HOA members exchanged nervous looks. Even the police officers froze mid-step. David leaned against the doorframe, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "So, you still want to come inside?" The woman stammered, her confidence cracking. We were just following up on a complaint." "That's all." Mitchell's eyes locked on hers. "You don't just burst into private property without cause, especially not today." The weight in his voice made the group step back. The 2 men behind the woman lowered their eyes, unsure of what to do. The police officers finally spoke. "Ma'am," one of them said carefully, "maybe we should let this go." But the woman didn't back down completely. Her pride kept her standing, even when fear crept into her face. "This community has rules," she said, her voice shaky, "and no one is above them." Mitchell straightened his suit. "You're right. No one is above the law." And I'm here to make sure the law is followed, not abused. David's chest rose and fell as the moment hung in the air. He could feel the storm building. This wasn't over, not even close. If you're still watching, you can probably feel the tension in this room. But trust me, it's only getting started. Before we dive into what happens next, make sure you hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications. The air outside the cabin felt heavier than the summer heat. David stood in the doorway, his hand still on the knob, watching the HOA woman's face lose its fire. For the first time since she arrived, she wasn't the one in control. The Attorney General's badge glinted in the morning light. The two men behind her shifted uneasily, whispering to each other. The officers who had approached slowed their steps, now caught between obeying their orders and the higher authority, standing in front of them. David's heart pounded, but he kept his expression cool. He knew this wasn't finished. People like her, people who believed power gave them ownership, didn't back down easily. Mitchell slid his badge back into his jacket. Now, he said calmly, why don't you explain why you're here? Harassing a homeowner without a warrant? The woman adjusted her blazer, her voice shaky but stubborn. We had credible reports, loud gatherings, unauthorized modifications to the cabin exterior. This entire community has rules, and Mr. Harris, she turned, glaring at David, has been ignoring them. David laughed, a short, sharp sound. Rules? Lady, the only gathering I've had here was a barbecue with my sister. And as for modifications, you mean the birdhouse I put up last week? One of the HOA men muttered under his breath. It's not about the birdhouse. Mitchell caught it. Then what is it about? The silence stretched. David could feel the truth hanging there, unspoken but clear. He'd felt it since the day he moved into this neighborhood. He didn't fit the picture the HOA wanted. The woman tried to redirect. This isn't personal. We're just doing our job. Mitchell's voice dropped, slow and deliberate. Harassment isn't a job. Intimidation isn't a job. And barging into someone's home without cause? That's illegal. The officers exchanged glances. One cleared his throat. Sir, he said to Mitchell, do you want us to step back? Yes, Mitchell replied firmly. Stand down. This is no longer in your jurisdiction. The HOA members shifted again, the balance of power slipping. But the woman wasn't done. She clenched the clipboard in her hand so tight her knuckles turned white. You think a badge changes the fact that this community has standards? Mr. Harris doesn't belong here. He doesn't respect the order we've built. David felt something inside him snap. He stepped forward, his voice sharp. You mean I don't fit the picture you had in mind? Just say it. Go on. Her mouth opened, then closed. She looked away, but her silence said enough. Mitchell placed a hand on David's shoulder, steadying him. Don't give her the satisfaction. Let's deal with this the right way. For a moment, the group just stood there, the tension like a storm cloud that refused to break. Finally, the woman turned to her men. We'll be back, she hissed. This isn't over. David leaned closer, his voice low but firm. You're right. It's not. But next time, come with a warrant. Or better yet, don't come at all. The HOA team backed away, the two men avoiding eye contact. The officers retreated toward their car, clearly relieved to be out of the mess. When the last of them disappeared down the gravel road, David closed the door and leaned his forehead against the wood. His hands shook, not from fear, but from anger. Mitchell returned to the couch, flipping open his folder. You see why we need to finish this case? This isn't just about a cabin, David. It's about how power is abused. David sank into a chair across from him, still catching his breath. They'll keep coming. You know that, right? Mitchell nodded. And every time they do, they make our case stronger. But we have to be smart. No slip-ups. No excuses for them to twist. David looked out the window at the lake, the ripples calmer now. He wanted this place to be a sanctuary. Instead, it had become a battlefield. Then let's finish it, he said finally. Let's expose them. Mitchell's eyes met his, steady and determined. We will, but you need to be ready. The higher we climb, the harder they'll try to knock us down. Outside, a lone bird perched on the birdhouse David had built. It chirped free and unbothered. David watched it, feeling a strange mix of hope and exhaustion. The HOA thought they could intimidate David, but now they've walked into something far bigger. Do you think they'll back off or double down? Drop your thoughts in the comments. The next morning, David woke to the sound of gravel crunching under tires. He rubbed his eyes, the memories of yesterday's confrontation replaying in his head. He pulled on his flannel shirt and stepped out onto the porch. Two black SUVs sat at the end of his driveway. Doors opened and a group of people stepped out, more HOA board members. This time they weren't alone. Several residents from the neighborhood trailed behind them, whispering like spectators at a show. David's stomach tightened. It wasn't just harassment anymore. This was a display of force. Inside the cabin, Mitchell was already awake, his tie knotted, coffee in hand. He walked to the door when he heard the commotion. "They're moving fast," he muttered. "Too fast." David folded his arms. "They want a scene." The HOA woman from yesterday reappeared at the front of the crowd, her cream-colored suit pressed and perfect, her face hard with determination. She raised her voice so everyone could hear. "Mr. Harris," she shouted, "you are in violation of our community standards. You've ignored warnings, refused compliance, and shown outright disrespect. Today we're taking action." The neighbors murmured, some nodding in agreement, others just curious. David stepped down from the porch, his jaw tight. "Taking action? You already embarrassed yourself yesterday. What's this now, a parade?" The woman held up her clipboard like it was a weapon. "This isn't a game, Mr. Harris. If you don't vacate this property, we'll file immediate action against you. You don't belong here." The words stung, sharper than she probably intended. David clenched his fists. "Say what you mean. Stop hiding behind rules and paperwork. You don't like that a black man owns this cabin. That's all this is." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Some neighbors looked away, guilty. Others crossed their arms, silent but complicit. Mitchell stepped out beside David, his presence shifting the air again. "Enough," he said, his voice booming. "You're trespassing and you're harassing a homeowner without authority. Do you people understand what you're doing right now?" The woman's eyes flickered with uncertainty, but she pushed forward. "We have every right to enforce community codes. We're protecting our neighborhood." Mitchell pulled a folder from under his arm. He opened it, revealing stamped documents. "And I have every right to open an investigation into abuse of power, which, for the record, I already have. Every step you take from this point on adds fuel to the fire you started." The neighbors grew restless. A man from the back called out, "Is that true? Are we going to get sued for this?" The woman turned, her voice rising. "Don't listen to him. He's trying to scare us. This is about keeping order." But the cracks were showing. Some residents began whispering to each other, doubt creeping into their faces. David saw his chance. He raised his voice, speaking not just to the woman, but to the crowd. "I bought this cabin fair and square. I follow the same laws you do. But from the day I moved in, I've been treated like I don't belong. Not because of what I've done, but because of who I am. Ask yourselves, if it were anyone else, would we be standing here right now?" Silence spread through the group. A few people shifted uncomfortably. Mitchell stepped forward, his tone measured. "This is bigger than one man and one cabin. This is about fairness, about whether rules are being applied equally or being used as weapons." The woman's face hardened. She turned to the officers who had followed the group in. "Do your job. Remove him from the property." But the officers didn't move. One of them glanced at Mitchell, then back at the woman. "Ma'am," he said carefully, "we're not stepping into this." "Not with him here." He nodded at the Attorney General. The crowd broke into louder murmurs. The HOA woman's control was slipping, and she knew it. She pointed her finger again, her voice cracking with frustration. "This isn't over! You can't just hide behind titles and speeches. We'll take this higher if we have to." Mitchell's voice cut like steel. "Please do. Because when you take it higher, you'll find me waiting there." The tension snapped like a rope pulled too tight. The HOA members retreated, dragging their uncertainty with them. The crowd scattered, whispers echoing down the gravel road. David exhaled, his hands finally unclenching. He turned to Mitchell. "They're not going to stop." Mitchell nodded. "No, they're not. But neither are we." Inside the cabin, David sat heavily on the couch. His shoulders sagged, but his eyes burned with determination. "If this is the fight they want, then fine. But I'm not giving up my home. Not now, not ever." Mitchell placed the folder on the table, opening it wide. Inside were documents, evidence, testimonies, everything he'd gathered on the HOA's questionable practices. "Then it's time we move first," he said. The sound of the lake lapping against the shore filled the silence between them. David looked out the window at the water, his safe place now a battlefield. But instead of fear, he felt something stronger rising inside him. Resolve. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about everyone who had ever been pushed, silenced, or told they didn't belong, and he wasn't going to lose. The HOA has crossed a line, and now the fight is no longer just about David's cabin, it's about justice itself. Do you think David and the Attorney General can turn the tables? Hit that like button if you're rooting. 2 days later, the cabin felt like the center of a storm. David hadn't left except to walk the dock. His phone buzzed non-stop with calls from neighbors, some supportive, some cold, and some threatening. Word spread quickly. The HOA wasn't backing down. Mitchell, steady as ever, sat at the dining table with papers stacked neatly in front of him. "They've filed an injunction," he said, sliding the document toward David. "They're trying to force you out legally." David scanned the words. His chest tightened. "They're really doing it." "They're desperate," Mitchell said calmly. "That makes them reckless. Recklessness is what we need. It exposes them." Before David could respond, the sound of multiple engines rumbled down the gravel road. He rushed to the window. A convoy, more SUVs, another squad car, and this time a moving truck. David's stomach dropped. "They're here to throw me out." The HOA woman stepped out first, flanked by board members and officers. She looked almost smug, her cream-colored suit bright against the dark vehicles. Behind her, a crowd gathered, neighbors again, drawn to the drama. David's pulse pounded. "We can't let them do this, Rob." Mitchell stood, smoothing his tie. His voice carried calm authority, but his eyes burned. "We won't." The knocks came fast, shaking the wooden door. "Mr. Harris," the woman shouted, "you are officially in violation. We have the right to remove you and seize this property." David yanked the door open, his voice cutting sharp. "You don't have the right to anything. This is my home." The woman raised the clipboard like a trophy. "I have the paperwork, and I have the law on my side." Mitchell stepped forward, his badge flashing in the light. His voice was ice. "No, you don't." The murmurs in the crowd died instantly. The woman's smile faltered. "Excuse me?" Mitchell pulled a set of sealed envelopes from his briefcase. "These," he said, holding them high, "are subpoenas, filed through my office. They cover your board's financial records, your voting procedures, and your enforcement actions over the last 5 years." The HOA members behind her stiffened. One of the men muttered, "Oh, no." Mitchell's tone sharpened. "We have evidence of selective enforcement, financial mismanagement, and violations of civil rights. You've turned this HOA into your personal weapon, and now you're under investigation." The crowd gasped. Neighbors leaned closer, whispering fiercely. The woman's face twisted, caught between fear and pride. "You think this scare tactic will work?" "This isn't a scare tactic," Mitchell said. His words hit like thunder. "This is the law." David stepped forward, his voice carrying across the crowd. "You've harassed me from the day I moved in. You thought you could push me out because I didn't fit your picture of who belongs here. Well, I do belong here, and I'm not leaving." The officers hesitated, caught between two authorities. Finally, one of them spoke. "Ma'am, maybe we need to step back until this is cleared up." The woman turned, furious. "You're letting him get away with this." But the officers didn't budge. Neither did the crowd. Mitchell raised his voice one last time for everyone to hear. "This cabin is not just David Harris's home. It's a reminder that no one is above the law. Not an HOA, not a board, not even you." The silence that followed was electric. Then, slowly, neighbors began to nod. A few even clapped. The pressure shifted like a tide. The woman's clipboard shook in her hand. Her men avoided her eyes, and for the first time she looked small. David exhaled, steady now. "You wanted a fight. Well, here it is, and you just lost." The woman dropped her arm, her words reduced to a whisper. "This isn't over." Mitchell's gaze didn't waver. "Yes, it is. For you." The convoy retreated, the moving truck turning back down the road. The neighbors stayed, buzzing with conversation, their eyes on David. But this time, they weren't looking at an outsider. They were looking at a man who stood his ground. Inside, Mitchell placed the subpoenas on the table. "The legal process starts now. It's going to be messy, but the worst is behind us." David leaned against the doorframe, finally allowing himself a deep breath. "For the first time since I bought this place, it feels like mine. The showdown at the cabin may be over, but the legal battle is just beginning." If you've made it this far, smash that like button and subscribe. Weeks passed, but the storm left behind by the HOA showdown never fully calmed. The lake sparkled under the sun, birds sang in the pines, but tension lingered like mist in the morning air. David's cabin, once a target, had become the center of conversations in town, in coffee shops, even on local news. Inside, stacks of legal documents covered the dining table. Mitchell was back and forth between the cabin and the city, but every time he returned, he brought updates. "They're folding," Mitchell said one late afternoon, loosening his tie as he dropped a folder onto the table. "2 board members resigned last night. The treasurer is under investigation for embezzlement. And your friend in the cream suit? She's been stripped of her authority." David stared at the folder, hardly believing it. "It's really happening." Mitchell nodded. "The system works, sometimes slowly, sometimes painfully, but it works." David walked to the window, looking out at the lake. His reflection in the glass looked different now, stronger. He thought of every knock on the door, every stare, every whispered word that tried to tell him he didn't belong. And he thought of the moment he stood his ground and refused to be silenced. When he turned back, Mitchell was smiling faintly. "You didn't just win for yourself. You won for every homeowner who's ever been bullied by people abusing power. That's bigger than this cabin." David chuckled softly, shaking his head. "I just wanted some peace. Didn't think I'd end up in a war." Mitchell leaned back, his voice calm. "Sometimes peace only comes after the fight." That evening, a few neighbors came by. People who had once avoided his eye now stood on his porch, offering handshakes and quiet apologies. One woman brought a pie, saying softly, "You stood up when we couldn't." David accepted it with a small smile. "I didn't do it alone." He glanced back at Mitchell, who gave a knowing nod. As the sun dipped below the trees, painting the water in shades of fire, David stepped onto his dock. He let the sounds of the lake wash over him. For the first time since moving here, the cabin felt like what it was meant to be, home. The fight wasn't just about wooden walls. It was about dignity, about standing up to people who thought rules gave them the right to trample others, and about proving once and for all that belonging isn't given, it's claimed. David looked out at the horizon, the Attorney General's words still echoing in his mind. Sometimes peace only comes after the fight, and this time, the fight was worth it. David's story is a reminder that standing your ground isn't just about defending property, it's about defending dignity. What do you think? Was the HOA ever really about rules, or was it something deeper? Share your thoughts in the comments. And if this story moved you, hit that like button, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Because sometimes, the battles we fight in our own lives are the ones that bring real change.